Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Andrew Roger. I'm an executive director of the Stonehenge Group. We're a multidisciplinary, multi-family office with a tax advisory capability, so these matters are very close to our heart. I just wanted to stand up and thank not only our co-sponsors but also Policy Exchange for the work they put in the preparation of this important paper. There is a real scarcity of hard information that is available to those who are charged with the task of making the UK a more competitive place. This is why we ourselves have prepared the report that I hope you're going to grab on the way out on the economic contribution that the international business community make to the UK. The non-DOMs copies are available over there. But this policy exchange paper highlights acutely the opportunities and immense challenges that the UK faces in an ever more competitive world. And I'm sure this is going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion that will take those considerations much further. And on that note, I'll hand over with great pleasure to the business editor of The Spectator, Martin van der Veer.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to emphasis on the word warm. I think the first reason one might consider moving to Switzerland at the moment is indeed to find a warmer climate than we have in this country. It's a pleasure to chair this discussion this morning. The form is that Ted Sumster, the author of the paper that you have on your chair, is going to introduce the paper for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we will have a panel discussion, and I will introduce my fellow panelists when we get to that moment. So let me first of all call on Ted, who's a research fellow of Policy Exchange, but has previous experience, he tells me, working both for Tesco and in the M&A world in the city. So Ted, please introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, this paper was mainly sparked out of an increasing number of media reports that not only businesses but also individuals were choosing to leave the UK, that they'd more or less had enough. Inevitably, there are always concerns about whether or not, when somebody is saying things like that, they're just trying to kind of put pressure on the regulatory, the taxation environment, or whether they're actually kind of warning, they're trying to kind of make a serious concern and put it out there before it happens. So directly as a result of this, we commissioned 2 surveys, one of senior managers to ask them about what they thought their organisation was going to do, and one about professionals to ask them what about their own personal circumstances, what they thought they were most likely to do in the near future. The financial sector has had a difficult few years. Falling off the back of the financial crisis, there have been a significant number of regulatory reforms, taxation increases, some of which may well be extremely useful, necessary to kind of ensure the safety of the financial sector in the future. One thing that we are slightly concerned about is obviously that when you start making changes, you need to have a very kind of long-term horizon about what you're thinking about. Even subtle changes, for example, the Sarbanes-Oxley reforms, which notoriously sparked kind of the growth of the AIM market, and even sort of the interest equalisation tax in the US, they end up creating the Eurobond market. These things happen, and once they're happened, they will continue. These things won't sort of automatically disappear as soon as you reverse them. So we just kind of wanted to actually put some figures on whether or not those tax changes, those tax and regulatory changes, were actually going to drive people away, or whether they were just actually kind of making people, putting people under a bit more pressure. So the big results of the survey, essentially, are firms going to leave? I mean, the vast majority of our research showed that most of them aren't currently going. They're not on that, they're not actually sort of currently departing, which is great news. That's excellent for us. Because obviously once these businesses have already departed and incurred significant costs of having left, then it's much more difficult to pull them back. But on the question of whether or not we've reached a very difficult point where the tax and regulatory burden may have become too much, we found that a quarter of firms had actually seriously considered moving from the UK. And perhaps even more importantly, with over sort of 25% of those we surveyed said that they thought it was likely that their business and other businesses in their sector were likely to move operational parts or teams or kind of headquarters out of the UK over the next kind of 2 to 5 years. Which obviously suggests that whilst we might not be having a current situation where lots of firms are changing their headquarters and disappearing, actually a lot of the kind of new business, a lot of the kind of general operational activities will actually be shifting away. So what we're facing is not so much an enormous exodus as a slow drain of what's been happening. there's already been a lot of anecdotal evidence of sort of big companies deciding to leave, deciding to move away. So that's a very helpful kind of situation to see that while those people have already left, it is very important to think about whether or not you're going to be increasing your activities or decreasing your activities. Because these focuses of financial centres are often strongly self-agglomerating. You know, once everyone's getting together in the same centre, once they're all able to work together, they have kind of big deep pools of capital, markets, professionals, these places become much more attractive to set up and to base themselves. So when you start to lose momentum, when things start to tip the other way, and people start to other centres start to grow, you may find that what becomes a slow drift actually accelerates and can be very difficult to reverse. As for professionals, we found professionals were even more likely than businesses to be moving, with 44% actually having seriously considered leaving. And probably most striking out of this was the fact that both professionals, the younger and senior professionals, as opposed to say support staff or executive management, they were the most likely to be kind of reconsidering their position and working out where they would be best choosing to locate themselves. Both young people as well were significantly more likely than the older types. This reflects a lot of the reasons why people are choosing to stay. You have a situation whereby existing social contracts, familial commitments, established business and social networks, those are obviously restricting a lot of senior people leaving. I mean, a lot of people we speak to say, well, we've got our kids set up in a school somewhere, we're not about to quit the UK, it's just not realistic. But at the same time, that might be entirely right. But if you're thinking about the long-term health of the UK as sort of a centre of financial services, when a lot of the new and kind of those people developing their own networks and kind of building the future are going to be setting themselves up elsewhere, then that has serious long-term consequences, even if in the short term we might not be facing a sort of an absolute mass exodus. And why are people leaving? I mean, overwhelmingly businesses said that the overall tax burden, the overall regulatory burden were their kind of key concerns. And commensurate with that was also the ongoing uncertainty in these areas. The fact that they were finding it very difficult to plan, to actually kind of think about what their business was going to be doing on a 2 to 5 year to 10 year scale, because the number of regulations were sort of so much up in the air. You have, the bank payroll tax is being talked about as being revised again, and taxes of that ilk can be particularly insidious because if you haven't laid out a clear plan, the government doesn't lay out a clear plan of exactly what they're expecting and what's going to happen, businesses might choose to leave on the grounds that they think something's going to happen. Even if you never introduce it, you never get the benefit of having curb bonuses, you never get the benefit of having received that extra tax revenue, and they'll still leave because they're expecting it. So anything like that, if you genuinely believe in that particular tax, then they should set out a clear plan for when it's going to be introduced, why it should be done, rather than just kind of introducing it for sort of political reasons at sort of a late minute. Regarding people, they were much more driven by kind of the general strikes of life, high living costs, the kind of personal tax burden they face, kind of a consideration of poor quality of life in the UK. And they were very, individual taxations were seen not to be the kind of key driver for exactly what was happening. It was much more the kind of the collection of individual sort of tax and regulatory decisions that was making the change. And where do we think they'll go? Well, this was actually relatively surprising, because for those amongst you who might have expected a lot of this business to be driven to emerging markets, to Asia, we found that firms overwhelmingly preferred the Crown Dependencies, Switzerland, Ireland. They were very much looking for kind of a European base that was tax and regulatory competitive, rather than say moving to Hong Kong, Dubai, Singapore, or looking elsewhere. Individuals were similarly kind of less focused on Asia, and they were very much keen, somewhat surprising to me perhaps, to move to the US, with again France, Crown Dependency, Switzerland and Ireland, kind of other key places they would choose to locate themselves. That may provide some conflict between that and their business decisions, given the fact their kind of preferences are, say, for the US versus those sort of competitive European regimes, which may be in the UK's favour, might provide some friction. And why do we think they would stay? Well, the UK obviously benefits from significant market access. It has an incredible reputation that's been built up over many years. We have an excellent infrastructure here for the financial services sector, and skilled workforce that's been developed over the decades of being a preeminent global financial centre. These are all excellent things for us to rely upon, but at the same time, very few people actually stated like the level of tax, the level of regulation as a positive as why they would like to stay in the UK. And that obviously is slightly concerning for us to be kind of resting on our laurels, as opposed to necessarily kind of seeking to attract new business and saying, look, we're an attractive place to come. This is somewhere you should be really thinking about. Workers, again, were largely drawn by the fact that they had their existing personal networks. That was the main reason, and the actual physical costs of relocating. These are the reasons they're staying, not because they actually necessarily like being here, which is obviously slightly concerning. Should we care? I'm sure lots of people will think maybe it's good riddance to the bankers, maybe it's good riddance to the financial services sector. They've caused a lot of problems, the economic damage from the financial crisis, all the substantial financial support that's been to the banking sector. But whilst we don't make a normative judgment about this in our paper, we believe that there should be a sensible sort of cost and benefit analysis of the advantages the financial sector brings. It's not a simple question, but I think it's worth noting at this point that almost any industry provides such a significant chunk of GDP, employment, fiscal revenues, contributes to the current account balance. Anything that provides this much, we should be very careful about the moves we make in terms of what we really want to see happen. Anything that goes too far and gets rid of this before we've thoroughly assessed whether or not this is a valuable industry, and the policy choices we make will not be sufficiently well informed. But what should the government do? Well, our key recommendations from our report is, first of all, there are no kind of clear figures on what the actual migration is for the financial services sector. We are reliant upon anecdotal evidence. We're reliant upon kind of people like us, people like Policy Exchange, running surveys to try and ascertain exactly what's going on. So we believe they should monitor key industry migration with an annual city health check to have an actual monitor of what's actually coming in, what's going out, what type of businesses are going and where. Because again, as long as you're monitoring that, as long as you're aware of exactly what the nature of the problem is, then you're going to be much better informed. We also believe they should actively monitor what people's perceptions are about competitiveness. Because often, as I said before, once people have left, it's very difficult to get them back. So the more the UK can be proactive in ensuring its competitiveness, the better. And we believe they should publish an annual appraisal of the net value of financial services to actually make that calculation, make that difficult evaluation of whether or not financial services is a very useful thing for the UK. And we also, taking the assumption that obviously an industry of this nature that actually does provide and is such a significant part of the economy, forgiving kind of the dependence that some countries, for example Iceland and Ireland, have perhaps had on the financial services sector. We believe that if they actually want to set the tone, set the right atmosphere for kind of the attractiveness of the UK as a centre, they should at least try to signal a change in direction in the kind of the trend of increasing tax and increasing regulation. We're not expecting them to kind of reverse all the changes that happen. A lot of the reforms that are being introduced are entirely sensible, but it's a point about laying out exactly what they're going to be doing and when, and signalling that they are keen to retain the industry and they are keen to be competitive. And that's all that I can really ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have until sometime shortly after 10 o'clock to discuss all this, so we're very much looking forward to hearing your opinions and experiences from the floor. Is your firm seriously thinking about moving its entire business or key parts of its business, profitable parts of its business, elsewhere in the world? Are you personally thinking about your career prospects and whether they might blossom more if you lived elsewhere? So please speak up from the floor when we come to that. But first, some comments from, let me give you a little framework how we might look at this, and then I'll invite my colleagues here to give their initial comments. So the first question that occurs to me is this a real and big and substantial issue, or given what Ted has just told us about the scale of the infrastructure, the workforce, the kind of cluster effect of having so many financial businesses in London, is this an issue that's rather more talked up than real, talked up by Geneva estate agents, as it were, who are trying to sell office space, talked up somewhat perhaps from the mayor's office in case it should become a bigger issue than it really is? If you're a young person, I mean, if you're anywhere under 40, I would say, someone ancient like me is asked to give advice to young people, I say go abroad, grab the ticket. If your boss is offering you a posting to Hong Kong, Shanghai, Geneva, wherever it is. This is a globalized world, especially in finance. You would be mad not to develop your career by spending some part of your first 15 or 20 years of working life elsewhere other than in London. So that's a natural factor that's always applied. It applied to my generation, it applies now. So, and if this is a real significant issue, more than one that's being talked up, is it more to do with regulation or more to do with tax? That is to say, is it that running a successful business is being made so difficult and so constrained by the regulatory regime that it's really too tiresome to persevere here and better to go elsewhere? Or is it that simply people feel this in their wallets? They don't like 50% top rate of tax, they don't like the bonus tax, they don't like the ways in which the profits of their business that will flow through as personal wealth are being constrained. So can we separate the regulatory from the personal wealth angle of this? And thirdly, and here I have to sort of try and imagine I'm representing the New Statesman rather than the Spectator, as it were. If it is a real issue, is it a wholly bad thing? If the result of an exodus of a certain element of our financial services industry in Britain were to emigrate, as it were, and what was left behind was better regulated, more restrained, but slightly smaller, and some of the more dangerous elements of finance had migrated elsewhere, and entrepreneurs were encouraged towards businesses that weren't in finance, but were in manufacturing and services and other things, high tech, whatever it may be, would that be a wholly bad thing? So I offer you that as a structure that we might discuss later. But let me now turn to my two colleagues on the panel. First, on my left, your right, as you look at us, I want to introduce John Rhodes, who is a director of Stonehage Law. That's the sort of law department of the multifamily office of the Stonehage Group. John was for 40 years a solicitor with McFarlane's in the city, I believe, so has very, very long experience of all these issues. So John, give us your first reaction.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Martin. Exactly, I think that's why I've been asked to comment, because I spent quite a significant part of that 40 years at McFarlane's advising international families, including in particular resident non-domicile families living in the UK. And when I arrived at Stonehage, I found that they had started to prepare a report which came out in 2007, and we repeated that in 2010, and their copies are here, on the role of the resident non-domiciled individuals in the UK economy. So that's my perspective on this. Many of you here will be familiar with the results of that survey, and they do match to some extent the statistics which are in the policy exchange document, although they were conducted under rather different conditions. Just to summarize the key findings, and we started this exercise by going under the Freedom of Information Act to the Treasury to ask for information about resident non-domiciled individuals living in the country, because we felt it was important to have the facts. And the facts we discovered were that in 2005-06, there were 114,000 resident non-domiciled tax returns made. By 2007-08, that number had increased to 140,000. And we worked out that over the last 10 years, there'd been an average 4% compound growth in the number of resident non-domiciled individuals arriving and paying tax in the UK. And we estimated that the taxes paid in 2007-08 by the 140,000 here were quite substantial. Income tax of £4.5 billion, VAT and stamp duty estimated a further £3.75 billion, so total tax take from these characters of £8.25 billion. And if you look at the Sunday Times Rich List, they estimated that the top 50 wealthiest resident non-domiciled individuals in the country are responsible for the employment of over 40,000 people here. And our concern was that after the Finance Act 2008, the rate of increase, this 4% compound increase, might begin to drop. One of the other factors I should have mentioned was that we also estimated these resident non-domiciled individuals were spending at least £19 billion in the UK economy each year. So the concern was that we'd had this picture of an increasing group of these individuals coming here, and that the 2008 changes would not necessarily drive everybody away, but what they would do is slow down the rate of increase. And we did our own survey of 25 professional firms who deal with these clients, and the answers we got from that were that 2% had gone for sure already, and 2/3 of the advisors we spoke to said that more than 25% of their resident non-domiciled clients were taking serious advice about leaving. So our conclusions were that if the rate of increase dropped just by 1% to 3% a year, then within 5 years the Treasury would be recovering less tax from this group of people than if it had never made the Finance Act 2008 changes, including the introduction of the £30,000 fee. And obviously, if the rate of increase drops and there are less of these people here in the country, then the rate of their spending in the UK economy would drop as well. And the main concerns that were enunciated to us by our clients and by the advisors we saw is not so much the fact of the £30,000 charge. That really registered pretty low in the scale of things. The two main issues really were that the current tax system for resident non-domiciled individuals has just become unspeakably complicated and very, very difficult to understand and to predict. There's a lack of certainty about a number of issues, and one of the most important issues is the absolutely crucial thing, which is that it's not terribly easy to explain to somebody all the time whether or not they're going to be treated as resident in the UK or resident outside the UK. It does seem to me that it's absolutely fundamental that if there's anything that ought to be clear about a tax system, it ought to be clear whether you're in the thing or out of it. And that at the moment is not as clear as it should be. And all this has led, unfortunately, to a general feeling of hostility on the part of the UK government, the UK regulators, the UK revenue, against this interesting group of people. So together with others, we've made some representations to the Treasury, and one of the things that we said was, please, for heaven's sake, don't make this situation worse without having thought through the long-term implications of what it might be you were going to do. And you may remember that it was actually George Osborne who first came up with the idea of having an annual charge for the benefit of operating on a resident non-domiciled basis. And it was originally his intention that that charge should apply in your first year of residence here, not as under the present rules after 7 years. And right up to the election, the Conservatives were still saying they're going to make this change straight away. But because it was linked to the increase in the inheritance tax nil rate band to £1 million, because the one thing was supposed to finance the other, and that didn't come through, we hope that for the time being, that is on the back burner. So that's a good thing that that didn't happen straight away, because we thought that would have been a very bad sign for a new government to have given. We asked that there should be a real commitment to simplifying the rules. We asked, really much the same way as mentioned here, that policy should be made clear that these people are welcome in the country, and that there should be certainty on the residence rules. Many of you will have heard about the Gaines-Cooper case. Which is interesting, but clever tax work by the revenue, but hugely counterproductive. So, I mean, I recognise the difficulty of the government, but my general view at the moment is that we've been living in cuckoo land almost all my professional life. We've been living on the back of a very vibrant economy fueled by debt, and we've now got to the point where we've run out of road, and you know, we've got this tremendous imbalance between the Western colonies and the East. We've got all the debt, they've got all the cash. Somehow or other, all this is going to have to get straightened out, and I think we're beginning to see the beginnings of that with the problems of Ireland and Greece. And these people are the entrepreneurs that we want to encourage to continue to come and provide our economy with stimulus. So we should look after them.
Great, thank you very much. On my right now, Anthony Brown, well known to many of you, I think former Director of Policy Exchange, also well known in his time as a journalist for the BBC and the Times, and now policy director for economic development for the Mayor of London. So, Anthony, how worried is Boris about all this?
Well, thank you, Martin, and thank you, I should say, to Policy Exchange for this excellent report, and also for going remarkably upmarket since I was director here. We used to do whole events in sort of dingy basements in Westminster, and I think this is far more congenial. This report is excellent because it's actually trying to put some solid evidence on an issue that has been incredibly anecdotal, and which Martin accused us of trying to talk up. I mean, in the Mayor's office, we've got no interest in talking up the problem, but in fact, we want to do exactly the opposite. But on the other hand, if there is a major threat to one of the most important sectors of the London economy, then we have a duty to speak up about it. And in the Mayor's office, we have people approaching us on almost a daily basis, saying they're planning to move overseas, or from small operations to really some of the biggest banks. And about a year ago, which did really kick off a lot of the media storm about this, the whole flurry that started after the previous government introduced or announced it was going to introduce the bonus tax last year. And a whole series of organisations contacted us saying they're going to move these staff abroad. And I got some of my staff just to add up. If all their threats were real, how much would it actually add up to? And they came up with this figure, 9,000 staff. And one of the press officers put this in a footnote, notes to editors at the bottom of the press release. I mean, I didn't realise they were doing that, but anyway, it entered the public domain. And of course, the Evening Standard then splashed with it on the front page, saying Boris warns 9,000 bankers about to leave tomorrow. And literally, it took about a week for the Guardian and Newsnight to do follow-up stories saying they haven't left. Boris is wrong. And the point is not that we are saying that everyone's about to leave. In fact, clearly they're not. But it's when people are making threats like that, we're really sort of passing it on an anonymised basis to the public domain. If these threats are real, this is what happens. We thought we had to sort of pass on the discussions that are happening. And I have discussions literally every day with different banks and financial institutions about how they're planning to move people overseas or not move people here, etc. And that is the tone of the conversation. It is the wrong tone. We should be having discussions about how they're planning to grow or move people here or whatever. And the real threat isn't that a big bank is going to move lock, stock and barrel overseas, let alone to Geneva, because there's huge logistical problems with that. Geneva couldn't support a major bank in quite the same way as the right infrastructure and so on. And the real threat is more the salami slice, which this report sort of refers to. It's actually moving different bits of back office operations or trading, where you book the trades, you can do it overseas rather than the UK, and in particular future growth. And I think this is the critical one, that actually a lot of banks, as they operate obviously on a global basis, a lot of them based in New York, they look at the world, they're looking where do they, particularly the Asian markets, a lot of the new business there could actually be done out of London. They're looking where they put the new staff and so on. Why would you put it in London, which has declared itself seemingly to the rest of the world as hostile to financial services? And it is extraordinary. I mean, we have a lot of discussions with global banks, and their boards, not based in London, just can't understand what's going on in London. They just see this incredible hostility. We're the world's leading, in many ways, financial services centre. We're the only financial services centre in the world that's introduced not just one but two special financial services tax. We have the bonus tax on bankers, we've had the bankers levy, and now the government's sort of making warning sounds about introducing more of them. And it's the boards of these banks are saying, well, doesn't London want to be a financial services centre? And I think this is the most critical question that we need to answer. And it comes back to Martin's sort of new statesman point about it, is would it be really good if all these people left? Or it is a rather bizarre dynamic that actually it's all the left-wing journalists who keep sort of challenging us, saying, look, they haven't left, and actually they're the ones who want them to leave anyway. But we actually should ask ourselves, and we really need to ask this question as a country, do we want to remain a global financial services centre? That is the first and most basic question. I think unequivocally the answer is yes. I think there are so many benefits, not least in tax, and the financial services pays about £60 billion a year worth of tax. And so many other advantages that we absolutely do. And once you've answered that question, what follows from it is having, as Ted was saying, basically a strategy for competitiveness on financial services. And that means making sure we have an international level playing field. At least one of the big problems with a lot of things that have been introduced for tax and regulation is that we're doing it unilaterally, that actually we're doing things that no other country is doing. And whether or not it's right to have a bonus tax, that's a separate debate. It's certainly wrong that we're basically pretty much the only country that's doing it. When you talk about the banking levy, I mean, Obama didn't introduce this in the US. We are introducing it here, no one else is really doing the same. We've got the Vickers Commission on breaking up the banks and separating out to retail and wholesale banking. And whatever the rights and wrongs of that, another debate, it surely is completely wrong that we would be the only jurisdiction, the only financial services centre in the world that would do that. So we might as well just say, and we're just sending out a message to the world saying we're not interested in being a financial services company. So I think, really, first of all, we've got to answer the question, as a country, and politicians have to make the case, we want to be a financial services centre and want to remain that, and then secondly, carry on with make sure we have a competitiveness strategy for it. Just with one note of optimism there. I do notice, I was slightly worried after this government was elected. I thought there was an incredibly negative political spiral during the election campaign. All the politicians were sort of competing with each other in a Dutch auction to be as hostile to bankers as possible. Indeed, George Osborne did say in one meeting that we had that the bonus tax was, which raised, well, at the time we thought it was going to raise £5 billion. It raised considerably less in the end, but he said, this is a tax with raising £5 billion with a 97% approval rating in the public. What other tax is so popular? But actually, that hostile dynamic has continued after the election, and I think largely with the coalition it's very difficult. I mean, Vince Cable is, obviously openly a lot more hostile to financial services than George Osborne is, and he keeps announcing the outcomes of the Vickers Commission in incredibly sort of negative ways. But actually, I think the language is changing. That's my one little note of optimism. I was at a speech a couple of weeks ago with Mark Hoban, the Financial Secretary of the Treasury, and he didn't say anything negative about financial services at all throughout the whole speech, which was amazing and a triumph. And I hope politicians continue to try and change the tone on financial services. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that stimulating introduction. I'm just going to give my three colleagues here a minute each to comment on anything they've heard from the floor. So starting with you, John.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that I absolutely agree in relation to the wealthy non-domiciled people. It's the same issue. It isn't that they're all suddenly going to up sticks and go, but what's happening is going to be a reduction in the numbers that come here, and that's going to be something that you can't easily measure, except we predict it's going to be bad news for tax. And for tax gatherers generally. And the other thing is that there are many other countries now that have woken up to the benefits that we offer to these people. These people are internationally available, they can live where they want. And if you now look around at the tax packages that are available in other countries, they're beginning to compare quite favourably with what we offer. So if you look at Australia, if you look at Israel, even if you look at France and Spain, there are tax deals available for people which are there. So when you're a wealthy international family and you've got young members of the family deciding where they're going to spend the rest of their days, where they're going to bring up their children, these are the issues that we see discussed. And we see people moving, for example, from South Africa. Are they going to come to the UK? Are they going to go to Australia? Are they going to go to Israel? And I'm afraid to say that quite a lot of them now do not come to the UK, and they might have done 10 years ago.
Thank you.
Well, I think this the whole discussion today confirms really that there clearly is a problem. I think there's consensus actually that there isn't going to be an instantaneous mass exodus, which we never meant to imply in the Mayor's office. It is about slicing and about future growth. And we have to balance warning about sort of threats to London's status as a financial centre with my job, which is to talk up London. So I'm just going to end on a positive note and say London is a fantastic city to live in, despite what everyone said. It's got a good quality of life. It's got the English language, it's got the rule of law, it's got the sweet spot in the time zone, and there are a lot of reasons why companies stay here and invest here. And in fact, we had a recent roundtable with Boris, a lot of industry leaders who are actually moving businesses to London because it's so good, despite the tax and regulations. So, and I noticed, I presume that most of you are actually still living here and haven't left yet, so carry on staying here. Thank you.
Ted, any last word from you?
The only thing I'd like to say is I just hope that this report has given some sort of quantitative feel to the kind of important issue I'm trying to raise. But I think some of the interesting points that come out, certainly from Anthony and from the audience, are things like changing the politics, changing the way we're talking about this question, not treating it as a combative thing, us versus them. It should be more of a, this is good for all of us, we need to find a positive way to bring UK forward into the next sort of financial period, where we'll be attractive and the industry can grow.
Thank you. So, well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for your contributions. I think my questions are answered. This is a real issue. It is very much about regulation as well as about people worrying about their own personal wealth. And on the whole, it would actually indeed be a thoroughly bad thing if there is a growing exodus of people from the financial sector elsewhere. And we've heard some really quite worrying things said here. We've heard a representative of a very large financial services group saying that senior people are not looking to put new investment into London anymore. We've had an entrepreneur in the sector saying, I simply wouldn't be able to do today what I did when I started my career. We've heard a senior advisor of wealthy people saying, we've barely seen the beginning of the exodus. So this is a real issue, and I should just conclude by thanking Ted very much indeed, and thanking Policy Exchange for providing a very stimulating agenda for further discussion. The message needs to get out there, and I think you've helped us to do that. Thank you very much, Ted. Thank you, everybody.